There's a lot of stuff in this gospel that none of us have figured out. In 3 years, I'll see if I can figure out why in the world Peter was naked in the boat, much less why he put clothes on to jump into the water. There's just a lot you could go into in this sermon. But as you have predicted, I'm going to deal with the food. It is what I do best. I just wish Jesus had picked something other than fish for breakfast. I guess that's what he had. I guess that's what he was good at. But I imagine if it was this morning and Jesus was going to appear to me and cook me breakfast, he'd have a waffle ready with some chicken strips and a side of bacon with some cheese strips and some hash browns and a Diet Coke. You decide what's on your menu. Jesus will provide it in abundance. Some folks say this chapter was added after John finished his gospel because they didn't like the way chapter 20 ended with Jesus appearing to Thomas. And the verses, now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. Who knows? The point is that Jesus is risen. And the disciples, having already seen him twice, have gone out fishing because they cannot figure out what else to do. Well, 7 of them are in the boat, we hear. But the way they've always fished is not working. Their normal lucky spots are no longer lucky. Jesus tells them to try the other side, and they do. And they bring in 153, exactly 153. Still don't know why 153 or why they tell us 153. Maybe there were 153 known species of fish at that time. Maybe there were 153 nations at that time. I don't know. We think it's just meant to prove that it was a whole lot of big fish, almost enough to sink the boat. The already exhausted disciples were now sore from pulling in those nets. Jesus is a few steps ahead of them, as Jesus always is. And somehow, also not explained in the gospel, Jesus already had some fish. And they're already ready for breakfast. He'd already been out fishing before them? Who knows? Then they row their boat ashore. There on that beach, they figure it out. It is Jesus. They saw his face. They remember the first wedding miracle at Cana of Galilee when Jesus makes some wine, and not just some wine, but an abundance of good stuff. And that time he broke the bread and the fish and fed thousands when the disciples had forgotten to bring lunch for the crowds. And they knew right then and there this was the guy they had been following. This was the guy who had died and was risen in front of them, with an abundance of grace and grits or oatmeal or whatever's on your menu. I'm pretty good stopping there, thank you very much. It's a sermon we all can hear every day, even when we think we can go it alone and press on the same way we've always been fishing, even when we don't think we have enough to make it through to the next month, even when we think the world is rising up against us, even when we think we are all alone, even there, especially there, Jesus has already gone ahead and shows up and says, hey, you've got this, just try the other side. And then come and sit down for a bit and break bread with me and remember what it's all about. All this grace I have ready for you. I know you do not deserve it, but it's free and it's yours, so just row your boat ashore and take a break. Amen. But there's more. In this last chapter, added or not, they have some unfinished business. Jesus needed to talk to Peter, and the disciples needed to be reminded once again of their calling. It happens like that often, at least in my life, in the midst of whatever we are doing in sorrow or celebration, our unfinished business crops up and needs settling. In this case, it's Peter's need for forgiveness, restoration, that drives the end of this narrative, I think. But for all of us, the grace of God is present in those moments of settling, gently calling us forward to be who we are and only who we are, moving forward into our discipleship, different callings as they may be. So Jesus asked Peter 3 times, "Yes, Jesus, you know I love you." 3 times he asked, just like Peter had denied Jesus 3 times before his death, except there's more, as always. Remember, Jesus says, now you have to do and be what and who you were called to be. You're not here to fish for fish. You're here to fish for people. Now follow me. Come be fed, then go and feed others. Come be forgiven. I love you. Now go and forgive others and love them. It is the hardest part of the Christian life, forgiveness. I'll make that an I statement. It is the hardest part for me, forgiveness. Feeding a bunch of people, or giving away 10%, or showing up at church, or serving on a committee, or bringing goodies for coffee hour, singing in the choir, those are pretty easy ways to follow Jesus. Forgiving a crooked mayor who took advantage of so many. Forgiving yourself after you think you have won the Kentucky Derby, only to find out 10 minutes later that you've hit another horse and are disqualified. Forgiving someone who abandoned you. Forgiving a former bishop who killed a bicyclist while driving drunk. Forgiving God. That's where it gets hard. Really hard. Sometimes too hard. We want justice, our definition of justice. And all we get is Jesus saying, love God, love your neighbor, come and have breakfast and follow me. Pastor Michael McBride is an African-American pastor in Berkeley, California, where his church extends the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., but not just about race, but in addressing all oppressions in all forms, and his congregation looks like that. Bell talks about how different the message of some ministers is from the actual message of Jesus. To paraphrase Pastor Mike, some ministers put too much focus on what would Jesus do. Thinking in hypotheticals allows you to create your own personal Jesus who puts your own agenda first. Pastor Mike believes Christian ministers should be focused instead on what did Jesus do. There's a difference. One lets you and me be the judge. The other lets God do that work. What would Jesus do versus what did Jesus do? It seems to me that every time Jesus shows up, he invites people in to be fed. Or he goes and seeks out the lost and the lame. He forgives them and heals them and welcomes them to follow him. He tells us we have to forgive 70 times 7 over and over again. If you are without sin, then you go ahead and cast the first stone. If you are named Saul this morning, still breathing threats and murder against your enemies, well, get ready. Because if you keep walking, Jesus will show up. Everyone gets a conversion experience. Even you too will be called to follow Jesus, and you will be changed. Because once you meet Jesus, your life never is the same. You might even be Ananias, called to lay hands on a criminal and grant him sight once again as a messenger of the gospel of transformation. And scales will fall from your eyes too, and when you're done doing things the way you've always done them, you'll get a glimmer of hope and hear a voice of challenge and see fish jumping on the other side. Try the other side. There is an abundance of God's redeeming grace right there ready for the taking. And when you're worn out from hauling in that gift, you'll find your Savior even cooking you breakfast on a beach with a side of forgiveness for you, so you can regain your strength and do it all over again to follow Jesus. But there are also many other things that Jesus did, even if every one of them were written down. I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. Amen.